And a lot of the Gemaras here do have some practical application. And one of them I wanted to bring up for Gemara that we learned a little earlier. The Gemara says that Rav Chama was trying to get 100 people for his zimun, and they told him that we don't paskin that way. You don't need 100 because Ravina told him the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva that you have 10, you can say Elokeinu, and that's basically all you need. So yeah, if you think about that, what would the practical application of that story be? This Rav Chama Barbuzi tried to get 100, and Ravina told him you don't have to.
Maybe when they were talking before about Nevarech or Baruchu, that there is a difference in the number.
I'll tell you what they are talking about. What they're talking about is that every time you have a big number, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you're supposed to add a name of Hashem, another name of Hashem. And Rabbi Akiva argued and said, no, you do add the name of Hashem. Elokeinu, you say when you have 10, but you don't change that no matter how many, even if you have 100,000. So that really is what the Gemara is telling us, that we follow Rabbi Akiva, and you don't have to run after 100. But there's something else that if you learn this Gemara, you could take some practical lesson. Yes, Robert?
I guess the question is, if it was 10 or whether it was 100, you could still do a Zeman with three people. So it's just a matter how you're going to divide it, correct? It's not degrading anything. It's just a practical way of being able to do the birchat.
Well, the thing is, the 3 is definitely not as good as 10.
Okay.
But what the story tells us is once you have 10, you don't have to run after 100 or 1,000.
Right. Okay. Well then, okay.
Rabbi.
I got it. Yeah.
But 10 is better than 3. But,
no, the question is, I guess the statement is 10 is a minion.
Right.
But so it's a community. And and also praying together in a smaller group is more, let's say, satisfying than being lost in the crowd of 100. I mean, I don't know if I'm being irreverent, but you like to have a little community to do with people you know.
Right. There are those that like the smaller, personal, individualized groups. But generally, when it comes to a mitzvah, we say it's a bit more honor for Hashem when you have the more people. So there is definitely a concept, at least in the general sense, that we like to have large numbers. Now, for an individual, it doesn't necessarily help him in his concentration and so on. But for honor, generally a large number does help. But the question is, so what do we learn from that story? Does someone want to, Ezra, do you have a lesson from this story for us?
Well, I have a question.
Oh, let me just see if Moshe wants to. Moshe, do you have a lesson?
I just want to say, it seems like the more you have, there's more need to show more kafsut to the balabait. You know what I'm saying? It seems like, to say Baruch Hu, you're giving more, you're giving more kafsut to Hashem.
Again, we're not talking about Baruch Hu or Nevarech. We're talking about adding Elokeinu or adding Hashem Elokeinu or adding Elokei Tzavakos. That's what we're talking about in this story.
I see.
I'm trying to answer that question.
Okay, yes, Ezra.
So here's the problem with that, is that in order to keep on adding, it means that somebody's got to go around and count actual bodies and say, oh, we've reached 100. Oh, we've reached 1,000 or whatever it is. You can't just look as you did when you went from 3 to 10 and say, oh, 9 is like 10, and so therefore whatever. So there's a problem with basically wasting time to try and do the counting. And if you're going to say that the addition of each name or each name is just as important, and so therefore if you miscount and say something that's incorrect, that could be problematic, then in and of itself, you wouldn't want to do that. And so comes the idea of, let's stay with Elokeinu as being what we would say for 10 onward, because from a point of expediency and not having to wait until you know what the actual count is and which additional terms you have to add, all of that could basically turn off people.
Okay. Well, the only thing I would say to your issue would be, as you're emphasizing that there's an issue of the counting and it's complicated and so on, and but the way I count how many people came to my events is we have tables of 10, and I look around and I see. So I know if there's tables of 10, I know I've got 100 people when I have 10 tables and they're all full. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to, it's very easy. I'm sure that's how they used to count, according to Rabbi Yossi Glili. He didn't count 1,000 people. He saw that he set up 1,000 chairs and they're all full. I mean, I don't think he goes around
at a wedding. Can you do that?
That's what they do at wedding. How do they calculate how many people are coming?
Yeah, but look at the time when it's time to doing the Birkat Hamazon and ask yourself the question. I have put out 450 chairs. All right. Are there 450 people there? And the answer is no. You can't just go by number of chairs at an event. You actually have to count the number of people that are there. If you're going to follow the rule of, if at 100, I have to add this. If at 1,000, I have to add that, etc. You physically have to count the people.
Why?
Otherwise,
if it's full,
there's a problem.
If it's full, then you know how many people. No?
You know, I don't know about you. I've been to weddings where people basically, or any event where, you know, there may be 200-300 people there, whatever it is. And by the time they're ready to do Birkat Hamazon,
you can hardly have a minyan.
Half to you know, a fifth
no,
of the
you're
people
right.
are still there.
You're right. You hardly have a minyan.
So you can't just count chairs, Rabbi.
Well, I think what you're saying is you're really asking a question, Ezra. How did Rabbi Yossi Glili, what was he really saying that you follow these numbers and you add? How could you do that? And so you're really asking a question on Rabbi Yossi Glili, right?
No, I understand what he's saying. He's saying that
how could he say such a thing? It's not practical.
Yeah, but he's saying in a larger crowd, you should be more cognizant of the fact of who Hashem is and what he's done for you. That is 100%. I agree with him 100%. But from a practicality standpoint, there's a problem.
Right. So in other words, you're asking a question on Rabbi Yossi Glili, not on a halachic standpoint, but practically, how does he hold this halacha? How does he fulfill this? How does he apply this halacha? That's a very good question. I think it's a good question. And my answer to you is, at least the way I understand it, and it is that if you're dealing with a wedding where half the people left and half the people are walking around and who knows what's going on, it's like it's a whole balagan. So in that situation, you basically rely on the fact you have 10. I definitely have 10 people who washed. That is fine. I'm just going to do the Elokeinu, and I'm not doing the others because I can't spend all night counting people, and people are still going to be leaving while I'm in the middle of counting. But what he is saying is that if I do have an event that has, 100,000 cheers, and I see, they are absolutely full, packed, and there's even people standing, then I can do all the 100,000, the rule of how many, all the names of Hashem that are included in the 100,000. So he's talking about in a case where you know for sure, and you don't have to spend an hour counting, because then you'll lose people by the time you finish counting, and you will have to recount, and you'll never end up benching. But I think what my understanding is dealing with a scenario where it's easy to calculate. You sort of like you have it all set up in a way that you definitely have 100,000 people there because there's even people standing and there's 0 seats available. So that would be my understanding, that you're right, that if it was impossible to count, you just rely on what you definitely have. But if it is possible to count and calculate, so I think that's the way to answer the question. I think it's a good question. You're asking from a practical perspective. It's a good question. But what I was looking for was something else over here. It's Rabbi. The Maharam Meirutenberg. He says that you see a halacha from this Gemara. He says if you see, what did Rav Chama try to do? He wanted to get 100 people to do this extra name of Hashem and benching. So he was going to ask people to come. Do you want to eat some vegetables? Do you want to have some zainas, have a piece of cake, join us for dessert? He wanted to get that extra person to make 100. And so the Maharam Rutenberg says, you see from here, there's a mitzvah to try to get at least 10. Because we don't hold like Rabbi Yosef Glili, we hold like Rabbi Akiva that at least 10 is the number to be able to say Elokeinu. But what you see in the story is that you try to even invite someone else to make it that you have 10. Now, if you have 9 people, you should try to grab a 10th.
They did it.
The question really is, does it only apply if you have 9, or would it apply if you have 7 or 8 as well? But definitely, if you have 9, it seems from the Gemara that there would be an inyan, there would be a sort of like a mitzvah to try to get your 10th person, because you see that's what Rav Chama tried to do for 100. Yes, Isaac, did you want to say something?
No, thank you.
So
we actually do that. For example, in the Shiva Brachot, if you can't, sometimes you can only get 7 people to come, and so you invite, 3 or 4 others to come to make a Bohemian Mezonot and join the Mezuman in order to reach 10. So
that's correct.
That's what we do.
Right.
Rabbi.
Now, what Ezra is saying is that you do this by a Sheva Brochos, but what we're seeing in the Gemara is a whole new dimension of this. What do I mean? Because in order to say Sheva Brochos, and you want to give brachos to the Chassan and Kala, so for sure you need to have a minyan there, and you need to have them eating in order to be able to bench with the Sheva Brochos. But what about if you don't have Sheva Brochos going on, and you just are having a meal? It's a regular Shabbos. You happen to have 9 guests. Should you try to get a 10th? So if you need to make a Sheva Brachos, of course you're going to have to get a 10th because you need to do the Sheva Brachos. What about if you just have a regular meal? So I think it adds a whole new dimension. What Ezra, you're right. You're 100% right. When you need a minyan, and you need a minyan for Sheva Brachos, yes, for sure you do this. But what about if you don't need a minyan for Sheva Brachos? Are you going to go next door and try to get your neighbor to join? It's a very big chiddush. This is a very new halacha that probably most people aren't aware of, that you try. To what extent, I don't know. You're not going to spend an hour going around knocking on doors. But maybe if you look outside and you try to get, you see if someone's walking by, if they could just join your zimun, it does seem to be it seems to be appropriate to try to get that 10th person, especially if you have 9. It's questionable. The Levush says, I don't know if this applies if you have 7 or 8 people, but the Mishnah Berurah brings that even if you have 7, you should try to get another. Now, it's not so practical. Depends on where you live. If you live in Borough Park, you got hundreds of Jews walking down the road. Maybe it's no big deal. Depends what block you're on here, I guess, in North Miami Beach. If you're on a very Jewish block, I guess it's not such a big deal. At least if you have 9, for sure to get the 10th. But if you live in a place where it's hard, I don't know how practical it is. But there is an inyan. What we see here is that Rav Chama tried to get an extra guy to make 100, an extra few people maybe. So it's unclear how many people he needed, but he did try to get 100. So you see there is a concept of running to get these extra to make your minyan that you could say a lakena. Okay, so that's an interesting halacha that you see from this.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm
Ben.
sorry, but I don't know where you are at. I don't see anything about 100.
If you look on page 50,
Yeah, nun.
in the middle of the page,
Ein Aleph or Ein Bet?
Nun Amud Aleph, 50a,
Okay.
and Rava says the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Do you see that?
No, I see one is starting Tanya Nami Achi, the other one 11 Ribo.
Okay, before the Mishnah, about 3 paragraphs before the Mishnah, Ravina in Rav Chama Bar Buzi. Do you see that? Ravina in Rav Chama Bar Buzi?
Before the Mishnah,
Went to
let me find them. Okay, the Mishnah, 3 pages. I see Rabbi Ishmael Omer, Rav Ram Bar Papa Ikla Lebeit and Ishta. Not that, huh? ברכו את אדוני המבורך, אמר רבא.
Ben, what
Go
do
earlier. You got to keep going earlier. Ravram Bar Papa, earlier than that. Go back earlier.
Do you have just a Hebrew? Do you have the Hebrew Gemara?
Yeah.
Okay.
אמר
So
רבא
if
כי
you,
אכלין ריפתא.
oh, hold on a second.
The paragraph right before that.
Right before that. Okay, 11 ו-11 ריבו.
Yeah, but that's way back. That you got to go past. You went too far
יוסי
back.
הגלילי, אוקיי, יוסי הגלילי, מה יבד לי, היה רבי מאיר אומר מניין שאפילו
Ben,
עוברים,
okay. Do you see in the left margin where it says Hakahot Agra, almost 2/3 of the way down?
No.
Okay, then you probably don't have the same thing I have.
Yeah,
Okay. Anyway, keep going, Ben. You almost you're almost there.
Before the Mishnah, I have Reish Galuta ve'ikpad.
Yeah. What's that? What's the statement of Reish Galusa?
אמר רבא, כי אכילין ריפתא בי ריש גלותא מברכים שלושה וליברכו 10.
So go 2 lines up. Go 2 lines up from there.
Back up.
2 lines.
Okay. מהדר הבאי 100. Okay, there's 100.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't find it.
Okay, so that was one point that is interesting, the halacha that comes from there. Now, the other story that we discussed a little more at length, we tried to understand how there was a leniency in the benching, that you don't need to run after 10 if you're in the house of the exilarch. So I did want to mention one opinion that's brought in Shulchan Aruch, the Taz. The Taz has, we explained that there's a leniency because of kavod habriyos, respect for humanity. And because the exilarch would have been makbid, he would have been strict and angry if a person made a whole commotion there with the minyan doing the zimun against the communal zimun that he's going to do later. So therefore, it was permissible to do 3. And so we explained it based on the fact that it would be disrespectful to him. And if you wanted to do a 10 people zimun, and therefore and you wouldn't have been able to hear the zimun later because there were too many people. So you wouldn't have been able to hear the Brochos Hamazon or the zimun later. So the bottom line was there was a leniency that you do a small zimun of 3, even though you really should be doing the 10 people zimun. It wasn't so clear what the leniency is in the Gemara, but we did find that there was a leniency that you're in the house of the exilarch and you ate a meal with more than 10 people, but the thing was you weren't going to be able to hear the zimun and so on. There was a leniency. You do your 3 people. That was the now the Taz wants to prove from there. He says that the rule is that if you finish your meal together with 10 people, then you have an obligation to do a zimun of 10. But if you finish your meal early, so not everyone is finishing together, and you're sitting with others, but you finish your meal early before the others finish their meal, then the obligation of the 10 people zimun does not apply to you. And this is the reason why they were allowed to do their 3 people zimun, was because there was not a prohibition, because they didn't finish at the same time. They made sure to finish early. Because they made sure to finish early, they were able to do a 3 people zimun and not a 10 people zimun. So the Taz has a very innovative law that comes out from this, which would apply to weddings as well. In other words, we mentioned, according to Reb Moshe, how you could be able to leave a wedding early and so on. But according to the Taz, it seems like there might be a way around it without, without starting the meal with having in mind that you're not eating with other people. But the Taz has a leniency that you could really just bench with 3, as long as you finish earlier than the other people of the 10 people that you're sitting with. As long as you finish before them, you end your meal early, and you're not all finishing together. The obligation of the minyan of saying Elokeinu doesn't affect you, doesn't apply to you if you finish the meal early. So in other words, when does that law that you have to say Elokeinu, when does it fall upon you? Only at the end of the meal, when you finish the meal with 10 people together. But if you finish early, everyone else is still eating their flesh and whatnot, and you finish early and say, I'm ready to bench, and you bench early, there would be a leniency that you could bench with 3 people, and the Taz sees that from our Gemara, because that was the leniency that they had, that they benched early in the house of the exilot. How else could they have done it? It must be that the obligation of the minyan of the Elokeinu part of the zimun doesn't affect you until the end of the meal. So that's his innovation from this. That's his proof from this law, from this story. So you see how the Gemaras they do give us some practical rules that the commentaries on the Gemara try to pick up on, these little hints from the stories that we see here. Now, we did have a Gemara that mentioned that we had the Gemara here that said that Rabba Tosva says that 3 people broke bread together, and one of them benched early and left, and one of them benched early. He didn't leave. He benched early, and the thing was that the others can fulfill the zimun with him, but he doesn't fulfill the zimun with them, because ein zimun lemafreya. You can't do a zimun retroactively. He missed out. He benched early. He missed out. So I was thinking this is a very practical case. You have let's say you're at a bris, and they want to do a zimun with 10. They're counting and looking around. Who washed? Now, what about if someone washed and benched already? Can that person be counted in your zimun of 10? Right? If you're at a bris, let's say, and they want to do the zimun, they're looking around. At the end of the bris, that's where it's a big problem. You normally you struggle to find your minyan to bench with Elokeinu. And so you look around and you have maybe 8, 9. Anyway, then there's one person there that washed, but he benched already. Can he be counted in your minyan? What do you think? Can you count? If he didn't bench yet, good, he's perfect. But if he benched already, can you count him in your zimun? So what do you see from this Gemara? Rabba Tosfa says when you have 3 people and one person benched early and he's still sitting there, can you count him in your zimun? What does the Gemara say?
Yes.
You can.
Yes.
So you see that you can count someone even though he benched early. Now he loses the mitzvah of Zimun, but you can count him. He doesn't get the mitzvah because he benched early. He messed up. But you can count him into your Zimun. So you see from there that the same thing would apply, seemingly would apply to 10 people. But the question is this: what about if 2 people benched early and you're still, again, the Gemara's case was 1 person benched early and 2 people are still sitting there and they want to bench now with a Zimun, and they can. The Gemara says they can bench with a Zimun and they fulfill the mitzvah of Zimun. The guy who benched early, he lost out on the mitzvah of Zimun. He helps them, but he loses out. What about if 2 people benched early and you got the 3rd guy sitting there and he didn't bench yet? He says, I want to bench now. I want to do a Zimun. They said we benched already. So if you have 2 people who benched already and 1 person didn't bench, can you count? Can you do a Zimun then? What do you think?
He should pray by himself.
No Zimun, huh?
No Zimun.
Why?
Because the majority is done. The
majority is done. Okay, good point. And do you have a proof from the Gemara?
No, I didn't read the Gemara yet.
This was a Gemara we learned already. You read it already. So we learned the last 2 days. We learned this Gemara. But the thing is, if you look at the Gemara, what does Rabba Tosfa say? He gives an example only where 1 person.
Right.
Yeah, who is he calling?
What?
Who is he calling to bench? The only one he's calling to bench are people who benched already.
Okay. So is it good enough?
No.
Isaac found Isaac has an issue. How could you have the whole Zimun doesn't really make sense now. He's calling them to bench. That's a good point, Isaac. You're calling others to bench, but the thing is they benched already. The whole Zimun means that you're calling other people to bench. Now,
Rabbi,
that's great. I like that, Isaac. That's brilliant. But the interesting thing is they don't. I didn't see that as broad as a proof. I think that's a brilliant answer, Isaac. Rabbi. But the commentaries, you know what they base it on? They base it on why does Rabba Tosfa? They see it in the Gemara a little. They see it from the fact that the case of the Gemara is where 1 person benched already and 2 people didn't bench already, didn't be benched yet. Why does the Gemara pick such a case? Why doesn't it pick the other case where 2 people benched already and 1 person didn't bench yet? Let it pick such a case, and then you would have a bigger chiddush. It would be more. It would teach us an extra law that even if the majority benched already, you could still do it. And you see from the fact that the Gemara doesn't bring that other case, it must be that you can't do it. You can only do it if the majority didn't. If the majority didn't bench yet, and only 1, and you have 1 person. By a 3 people Zimun, you have a majority didn't bench yet, and you have 1 person who benched already. However, the question would be, Isaac, what happens if you have 4 people, 2 people benched already, or if you have more, 5 people, 3 people benched already, and 2 people didn't bench? What would be the halacha then if you have 3 people who benched already and 2 people who didn't bench? Can the 1 person who didn't bench yet, can he do a Zimun
of whom?
With the other people?
He can ask 1 of the 3 to join.
So the thing is, he's got a majority of people who benched already. Did they ruin it for the others? So the Rashba writes that if 1 person benched already, the other 2 can still do a Zimun because they are better than him and he can't ruin the Zimun. But if two people went and benched early, the other one can't do the zimun on with them because two people, they ruin the zimun, and the zimun is parach. It flies away from the group. Now the Tosfos Rabbeinu Yehuda adds that the proof is from our Gemara, and you see it as I explained in the Gemara. The Gemara said that only a case of one person. Now, the Shita Mekubetzes gives a slightly different reason. He says the reason why you can't do it with two, it only works with one, is because if you have two people who benched already, then ein hazimon nimsar liyachid. He says the zimun is not given over to an individual. You can't have the zimun given over to an individual, which sounds a little like maybe Isaac's explanation. But he uses it more in the technical words. He says is the zimun is never given over to an individual. Now, the Maimer Mordechai says that what would be the case of four people that ate, two people benched already without a zimun, and can the other two do a zimun? So he says it would seem that you could do a zimun because all they need is one person. So they have, it could be considered that the majority did bench, and even though two people is not majority, but all they need is one. And he says that he says even if you have six people and they all benched except two, the two people could do a zimun with those that benched already, because in other words, you could, even if you have majority who benched already, it shouldn't be a problem. That's what he brings. He concludes. So it seems like that would be acceptable to acceptable. Now, what happens when you have 10 and three people went and benched without a zimun? So the El Yerabba says that if you have 10 people, three people benched without a zimun, you could join those three and include them in the zimun. He says you could do that. However, there is a opinion that says that this only works with three. It doesn't work with a zimun of 10 because you're mentioning Hashem's name. So there is an argument about a zimun of 10 or a zimun of between a zimun of 10 and there is an argument if this works with a zimun of 10. In other words, it for sure works with a zimun of 3. But will it work with a zimun of 10? So it's such a thing is discussed. Okay. Bottom line is that we see there's a debate in the Paiskim about these cases. Okay, so now we did the Mishnah, and the Mishnah dealt with dividing up a group of people who ate together, and when you divide it, the law is that you can't divide a group if you're going to lose out in some of the benching. So for example, if you have a group of 10, you can't divide them into two groups of, or three groups of 3. You can't divide into 3 groups of 3 and 4. Why not? Because you lose the Elokeinu. But if you have a group of 6, you could divide it into 2 groups of 3. So that was the first case of the Mishnah. Now the Gemara was bothered with, isn't that repetitious? It's redundant, because we already learned in the first Mishnah in the chapter that Shloisha she'achlu ka'achas chayavin l'zamin, right? That's the name of the chapter. Shloisha she'achlu. 3 people eat together, they are obligated in doing a zimun. So the question is, why does it say it a second time? So the Gemara had 3 answers for this. And this we learned yesterday. What were the 3 answers? So the first answer was that even if they didn't eat a kazayas yet, of bread, they already have an obligation of doing a zimun together. The second answer was that the 3 people, they're not eating from a communal loaf of bread. They're each eating their own sandwich. And nevertheless, they are considered obligated in doing the zimun together. They can't divide up. And then we had the third answer. And the third answer was the very complicated discussion, debate among the commentaries, how to translate it. And what we explained, I mean, the simple reading of it is that Rav Huna had a case where you have 3 groups, and one person left each of these groups of, they would say, I guess they were like 3 people, 3 groups of, let's say, 3 tables. Anyway, each of the 3 people left these tables, and they decided to make their own group. And the law is that Einon Rishoin Lecholek, that even in this case, they are obligated doing the zimun, and they can't divide up. They can't just get away without doing a zimun. And Rav Chizda added that they had to come with 3 groups that had 3 people in them originally. But if they had groups of 2 people originally, then this would not be the law. But if they had the group of 3, then you have this issue of them now, because originally they had an obligation of a zimun, and they left that obligation, and they came to an alternative group. Now they found some new group that they joined. The thing is that they're going to still need to do a zimun, because there was a zimun obligation upon their shoulders when they started their meal, and when they had their meal. Now Rava adds, and that's where we turn the page, that this only applied if they did not have a zimun in their place. But if they already did some type of a zimun earlier, then the law of zimun flies away from them. And what that means is that once they had a zimun and they participated, either they participated in the zimun, again, this is very complicated how to translate it, because the commentaries all argue, did they participate or they didn't participate? And how many people were in the original group? And there's even an opinion that says that they have to go back to the original group to do the zimun, and they're not supposed to do the zimun where they are. That's like a totally alternative way of reading the Gemara. It doesn't really flow with the way it seems. But the bottom line is that the Mishnah said some law about 3 people doing the zimun, and it repeated itself, and it's teaching us that there is an obligation that affects people of a zimun, and that obligation stays with them even if they leave their original group, and they still have that obligation if they're able to do a zimun afterwards. Now, and then the Gemara tried to bring a proof from the law of Tumah. And that was also an interesting proof, because the law dealt with a broken vessel, like a bed that's broken, and the law of Tumah is that if a vessel is tameh and then it's broken, so the tumah departs from it. But if you rebuild the vessel, then it's considered like a new vessel, and the new vessel can become a receptacle of tumah. It has the potential of receiving tumah again, while in its broken state, it's not a vessel, so it's not eligible for tumah, to become impure. But after it's fixed, then the original tumah doesn't come back, but it becomes susceptible to tumah, and it could become tameh again from now and onward. It's called mikan ulahaba. From here and onward, it could become tameh. So the idea that Rava brought was that once something breaks, like this bed, when it broke, so the tumah was removed from it, and the tumah does not return. It becomes susceptible to tumah, but the original tumah doesn't return. And he says the same thing applies if they did a zimun earlier and the zimun left them. So when they come back and make a new group, the zimun left them, they're not going to be obligated in doing a zimun again, because even though they created a group together, but the zimun obligation doesn't fall back upon them. So that's basically the understanding of Rava, that he adds this statement that once you did a zimun, the obligation falls off, and it will not return. We could go more into this Gemara. I just think that it's a little complicated to go into. So I think we're going to just move forward. And if anyone wants to go more into this, I'm happy to. I just think it's maybe not the most exciting
Rabbi,
piece. Yes, Moshe.
it seems to me from this that the Zimun, the group that he was in priorly, he didn't say the Zimun. He said Birkat Hamazon early, but it seems to me that he feels that, that somebody who does that and then joins another group where they do have a zimun and then they say Birkat Hamazon, that they're carrying with them the feeling that people know that the mitzvah was not satisfied in the previous group. In other words, it's like, I said like Geneva, sort of, you know what I'm saying? He's going from what. But if he says it priorly in the first group, he says Zimun and then a Birkat Hamazon, and he goes to the next group. He doesn't have that obligation. In other words, you understand, the mitzvah was already completed.
Uh-huh.
Am I correct?
Well,
it seems
pretty much like you're saying, except that there's numerous commentaries on this Gemara. And everyone seems to argue with each other.
What the group feels, in other words, of that person who was.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, pretty much what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, on a simple level. Yeah. Ben, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think he did it because he wasn't sure that there will be a zimun where he's going to. The place he's going to, right?
And that's why he did what?
Place. He's going to another table, but he doesn't know if there's going to be a zimun at the other table. Maybe they did already. So he's doing his own, and then he's going to the other table.
Right. So if he did the zimun already, then he finished his obligation of zimun.
Yeah.
But the understanding is he didn't bench yet. He did the zimun before, but he didn't bench. But he's not going to have to do another zimun afterwards.
Yeah, I mean,
and then you have to add.
Right.
Then you have to add that he probably ate afterwards, because otherwise, why would you think he should do another zimun? So it must be talking about the case that he probably ate afterwards. These are like discussions and that the commentaries are dealing with, but that would be the understanding.
But I'm saying he did it because he wasn't sure that he will be needed for the zimun at the other table.
You want to explain why he answered the zimun? I would say he answered the zimun because they were zimuning. Yeah. They were doing the zimun, and that's why he answered maybe. Right. Not because he was nervous. But in any event, what I would like to do is actually read it. I'd like to read it inside, but I'm not sure if we should go through all the commentaries here because we could spend like 2 days on it. Let's read it inside at least, so we have the at least Rashi's interpretation. So we're going to start with the Inami Ki Had Rav Huna. So we're going to start again on page 50A on the bottom. 50A on the bottom. There's 2 lines up from the bottom of the page on 50A. I'll read it inside. So this is to explain why the Mishnah is redundant. It's telling us about 3 people ate together, and they're not rishoin. They're not allowed to divide up. And why is it redundant? So it's going to teach us some halacha. So we already had 2 answers, and now we have the third one, inami, or also you could say a third option. What's the story? Ki had Rav Huna, like the law of Rav Huna, that the Amar Rav Huna, that Rav Huna says, Gimel sha'achlu mi gimel shaba'u mi gimel chaburos. 3 people came from 3 groups, and einon rishoin licholek. So 3 people came to a 4th group. They came from 3 groups, and then they made their own 4th group. They are not allowed, einon rishoin licholek, they're not allowed to divide up, which seemingly means that they should do a zimun together where they are now. I will mention to you, the commentaries do ask on this, why are they doing the zimun now in their new place when they really should go back to the original place where they ate? But that's another halacha. And the general answer that's given is that we're talking about it must be an oinus, some emergency happened, and so they had to leave, and they need to be there. So the bottom line is that they left their original place. They are not allowed to divide up, and instead they should do a zimun here, and that's what the Mishnah is saying. 3 people ate together. They have to do a zimun. They have an obligation of zimun on their shoulders, and they have to fulfill it. And they should do a zimun where they are now. And that's what the Mishnah is telling us. It's redundant. It says it twice to tell you the special law that even though they left, but since they had an obligation of zimun earlier, they must fulfill it. And so they did eat together. There were 3 people that ate together originally. So they're not allowed to rishoin lecholek. They're not allowed to divide without fulfilling that zimun obligation, and they have to do this zimun. So, and now Rav Chizda qualifies this, and Rava qualifies it. They had to originally have an obligation of zimun on them, because if they didn't originally have a chiyuv, an obligation of zimun upon them when they initially ate, so then there's no reason for them to do a zimun later. The whole idea that they have to do a zimun later, which is something that the Mishnah has to teach us, is because it's telling you that once you had this original obligation, that you can't just let go of it. It's on your shoulders. You should make sure to do a zimun where you came to. Now, Rashi adds in, even if they didn't eat when they joined together, because they already finished their meal with the earlier ones, even if they didn't eat, they need to do a zimun together. In other words, they have an obligation of zimun. So if they have an obligation of zimun on them, again, we're talking about they didn't answer. Rava's going to now say that they didn't do a zimun yet. So they ate together originally. So again, they were eating at table A, B, and C. There was groups at table A, B, and C. As Rav Chizda says, that they had each table A, table B, and table C, at least had 3 people, at least. And so they had an obligation to do a zimun. The problem is these 3 people left their original tables. Now they came to table D, and the Mishnah tells you need to do a zimun at table D. And even though you didn't eat at table D, you haven't eaten anything, according to Rashi's explanation. They didn't eat anything at table D, but they're going to need to do a zimun now. Don't think you can just leave because you're going to say, oh, I didn't eat anything over here. No, you got to do a zimun. Why? Because when you were at table A, B, and C, you, each of you, the one that was at table A had an obligation of Zimun on him. The one that was at table B had an obligation of Zimun, and the one that was at table C had an obligation of Zimun upon them. And therefore, now they're at table D together. Each of these people, they have to do a Zimun even if they didn't eat now at this new table. Okay, and then Rava gives his qualification. Amar Rava, now we turn the page. V'loy amron, and it wasn't stated, this is not said, this law, ella deloy akdimu hanoch, that the earlier groups did not, the azmin alayu b'dechtayu, did not do zimun with these three people who left. In other words, when do they have the obligation of doing a zimun later when there wasn't a zimun done with them originally? So they had some emergency, they had to leave, they left the original group, and there was no zimun done with them. But if they were done a zimun with, like for example, they were called even though they had left. Let's say they went outside and they left, and they were called to answer to the zimun, and the groups benched with zimun. And they answered what they needed to answer, for the Zimun, even though they weren't exactly there, but they heard the Zimun, they were outside, and they heard the Zimun, they were in the marketplace not too far away. And so they answered the Zimun, and now they come back to bench. So in that case, they already did the Zimun, so the Zimun has flown away from them, and they do not need to do a zimun. Harach zimun minayu, it says. The zimun flew away from them, and even if they are sitting together with a group now of three, and they want to bench, they do not do another zimun again. And Amar Rava, and Rava says, Mina aminala. From where do I say this law? That once the Zimun left, they do not do a Zimun again? He says, I see it from the laws of Tumah. Ditnan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Mita shenigneva chetzia, a bed that half of it was stolen, Oisha of the chetzia, or half of it was lost, Oisha chilkua achin, or brothers divided the bed, or shutfim, or partners divided it, meaning they got into a fight and they want to say, listen, you take your part, I'm taking my part, and they just chopped it in half and said, listen, that's the way it is. We're taking our stuff. So somehow you're left with a half of a bed. The law is Tahira, it now became pure. This is a bed that was impure originally. Maybe it was maybe a dead body was on it. Somehow it became impure, and it was in the same room as a dead body. And the thing is that now it's broken half. It becomes pure because it's not usable. It no longer has the law of a vessel. It's a broken vessel, and the tumah goes away. It's tahira. It is pure. Hechziruha. Now, what happens if you found the piece of the bed that you had lost, or you built a new piece and attached it, or somehow you bought back that piece of the bed that your partner decided to take, and you worked out a deal and you bought it back, or your brother who had taken his portion and you now bought it back from him, and now you want to attach the two pieces of the bed and make a good bed. So hechzirua, you returned it, and you attached it together and made a bed, mikabelas tuma mikanu lahaba, it receives impurity. From now and forward, it is susceptible to tuma. If something tame touches it, if something impure touches it, it will become tame, but the original tuma left it. So Rava says, mikanu lahaba in, you see from this Mishnah in the laws of Tumah, it's a tractate Kalim, the laws of vessels. So you see from this Mishnah that it only is susceptible for Tumah, mikanu lahaba, from now and onward, lemafreya, but the retroactive impurity that was on it, loy, it doesn't stay, it doesn't return, it doesn't come back to it. Alma, we see from here, kivan de palgua, since it's been divided, and it didn't have the name, the term bed on it. It was divided in half, and it lost its title, being of being a bed. Parach la tuma mina, the impurity flew away from it. It leaves it, and it doesn't return. So hachanami here also, kivan diazman alayu, since they did a zimun. So the concept of them being obligated in zimun was fulfilled, and they left their group. Parach zimun minayu, the obligation of zimun left them, and it does not return, even though they joined together with others that need to bench. Their obligation of zimun doesn't return. So I'm just looking in the words of Rashi over here. Alma kivan de palguha, in this Rashi, which is about 10 lines from the top, Rashi says, Pakashem mita mina, the name bed left it, Vishem tuma, in the name of being impure. Aval gav dahadar hadrua, even though they returned the other half, harehi varehi mita, and it is now a bed, loy hadra tumasa, but the impurity doesn't return. Hachanami here also, even the Pakashem shloisha minayu, behefredim, since the term that they were three, since it left them, Vishem Zimun, in the name of the obligation of Zimun, left them al yadesha zimnu harishonim aleim, since the earlier ones did a Zimun with them and they benched, they did a Zimun with them. Avagab dahadri l'klal shem shloisha, even though they come back and they're now a group of three that have to bench, hadri l'klal Zimun, they do not join together for their obligation. They don't join, the term zimun doesn't return. So the shloisha sha'achlu returns, but the zimun doesn't return. Avakila yazmin, but if they didn't do a zimun, like pakacheva zimun mehen, they did not lose their zimun. Af lefi predasam, or lefnei predasam, and even before they left, the obligation of zimun it didn't leave them. And they would still be obligated in doing a zimun if they would still be obligated in doing a zimun if they didn't have the zimun original. So the only leniency that we're seeing here is since there was a zimun that was done with them, so they no longer have that obligation of zimun, even though they do have to bench, but the zimun left them, and it's not going to return until the next meal that they eat with a group of three. It's not going to return to them. So this meal that they originally ate does not return. The obligation of zimun for the meal that they ate does not return to them, and they would not need to do a zimun. And the only time they do need to do a zimun is if they didn't have a zimun originally done, and now they would have to do another zimun. And that's what the Mishnah is teaching us, this special law of this type of a case. Okay, so that's on a very simple level, very surface level, what the what the Gemara says. I will tell you that the commentaries do go into the fact that it doesn't seem to be so convincing. This is a law regarding Tumah. What does it mean that the Zimun flew away from them? They really fulfilled the Zimun is one of the questions. They fulfilled the Zimun, but the Zimun didn't fly away from them. They did a Zimun. They actually, fulfilled Zimun. So why is it using this term that the Zimun flew away from them? Anyway, so there are some questions that could be asked on this. It's 11:03. So I would like next week